The station called Harmony 7 floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower. Its silver arms stretched out in every direction, each one holding ships from different worlds. Captain Deho stood at the window of his small ship and looked at the massive structure. He had been here 21 times before. Each time he had asked the same question. Each time he had received the same answer. No. Behind him, his crew prepared for another meeting. Dr. Mirai checked her data files one more time. She wanted everything to be perfect. Lieutenant Junho adjusted his uniform and tried to hide his frustration. Pilot Hyejin sat quietly at the controls, her hands steady on the console. They all knew what would happen today, but they had to try anyway. The doors to the council chamber were enormous. They opened slowly, making a deep sound that echoed through the halls. Inside, 300 alien species waited. Some looked like birds with bright feathers. Others resembled giant insects with too many legs. There were beings made of light, beings covered in fur, and beings that seemed to be made of living stone. All of them sat in their assigned seats, watching as the humans entered. High Arbiter Velkoth sat at the center of the chamber. He was tall and covered in dark green scales that glittered under the lights. His eyes were yellow and cold. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire room. "Captain Deho, you may speak." Deho walked to the center of the floor. He had given this speech so many times that he knew every word by heart. But this time he spoke from deeper in his chest. He spoke with more emotion than before. "Honored members of the council," he began. "For 70 years humanity has waited at your door. We have shared our science. We have shared our medicine. We have helped build stations and explore dangerous systems. We ask for nothing except a chance to join you as equals. We want to be part of the galactic community." Several council members shifted in their seats. A few nodded, but most remained still and silent. Velkoth raised one clawed hand. "The humans are brave," he said. "They are intelligent, but they are also dangerous. Your species keeps predators as companions. You live with wolves and great cats. You train birds that hunt and kill. This is not normal. This shows something wrong in your minds. You cannot control your violent nature." Dr. Mirai stepped forward. "May I respond?" she asked. Velkoth nodded. "Our bond with animals is our greatest strength," Mirai said. "It shows that we can build bridges between different kinds of life. We do not see them as tools or weapons. We see them as partners and friends. This makes us more understanding, not less." The council chamber filled with noise. Some aliens clicked their mandibles. Others made whistling sounds. A few banged their appendages on their desks. Velkoth waited for silence, then spoke again. "That is exactly why you cannot join us," he said. "You do not understand the danger you represent. The vote is called. All in favor of accepting humanity into the Covenant. Silence, all against." The chamber erupted with sound. Voices, clicks, chirps, and roars all mixed together. The answer was clear. Junho clenched his fists. Hyejin closed her eyes. Mirai looked at the floor. Only Deho kept his face calm and steady. "The decision is unanimous," Velkoth announced. "Humanity remains Category 5. You are denied membership for another year. This meeting is over." The human delegation turned and walked out. Their footsteps echoed in the silent corridor. No one spoke until they reached their ship. 22 times, Junho said quietly. 22 times they have said no. Deho sat down heavily in his chair. "Maybe they are right," he said. "Maybe we are too different." Before anyone could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. An alarm filled the cabin. Red lights flashed across every console. Hyejin jumped to the controls. "What is that?" she asked. "Emergency distress signal," Mirai said, reading the screens. "Multiple sources. Coming from the Rimward colonies." The Rimward colonies were peaceful farming worlds on the edge of known space. They were home to the Tilani, a species of gentle herbivores who spent their days making art and growing food. They had no weapons. They had no military. They relied completely on the Council for protection. "What does it say?" Deho asked. Mirai's voice shook as she read. "Cities burning, thousands dead, unknown attackers. Please send help immediately." The crew looked at each other. Then they looked at the station where the council was meeting. "They must be responding," Junho said. "The council has to send ships." Hyejin checked the traffic patterns around the station. "No military ships are launching," she reported. "Nothing is moving." Deho stood up. "Connect me to the council emergency channel," he ordered. The screen flickered to show the inside of the council chamber. The delegates were still there, but now they were talking amongst themselves. Some looked concerned. Most looked confused. Velkoth was speaking. "We must study this situation carefully," he said. "We need to understand who these attackers are and what they want. I propose we form a committee to investigate." "A committee?" one delegate asked. "While civilians are dying?" "We cannot act rashly," Velkoth replied. "Military action requires approval from all members." "That will take time." "How much time?" The delegate pressed. "Several weeks, perhaps months." Deho cut the connection. His jaw was tight. "His eyes were hard, Captain," Mirai asked quietly. "Set course for the rimward colonies," Deho said. "Maximum speed." Hygen's hands moved across the controls before anyone could question the order. The ship's engines hummed to life. "But Captain," Junho said, "we are not authorized. We have no military support. Our ship is not armed for combat." Deho looked at his crew. "I know," he said. "But those people are calling for help. The council sits and talks while they die. Someone has to answer. What can we do?" Mirai asked. "We are just one ship. We do what we can," Deho replied. "And we call for more help." The ship pulled away from Harmony 7 and jumped into faster-than-light travel. Behind them, the council continued to debate. Ahead of them, people were dying. And somewhere in between, humanity was about to make a choice that would change the galaxy forever. In the cargo bay, a few emergency supplies sat ready. Medical equipment, food, water, not much, but something. In the crew quarters, each person carried photos from home. Photos of family, photos of friends, and in many of those photos there were dogs and cats and birds, the companions that the council feared so much. None of them knew it yet, but those same companions were about to become the galaxy's salvation. 3 days of travel felt like 3 years. The crew barely slept. They took turns monitoring the distress signals, which grew weaker each hour. Sometimes the messages were clear. Sometimes they were just static and screaming. Each one was harder to hear than the last. When they finally arrived at the rimward colonies, the sight made them all go silent. The first planet should have been green and gold with farmland. Instead, it was gray and orange with smoke. Fires burned across the surface like angry scars. From orbit, they could see entire cities reduced to rubble. Hygen had to steady her hands on the controls. "How many colonies are there?" Deho asked. 7 planets, Mirai answered. 40 million Talani lived here. Past tense, she added quietly. "We need to land," Junho said. "We need to see what we are dealing with." The ship descended through thick smoke. The landing zone was supposed to be a spaceport. Now it was just broken concrete and twisted metal. Bodies lay scattered among the debris. None of them were human. The crew stepped out wearing protective suits. The air was toxic with chemicals and burning plastic. In the distance, they could hear sounds. Not voices. Something else. Something mechanical and wrong. "What are those things?" Hygen asked. Through the smoke, shapes began to emerge. They were huge, maybe twice as tall as a human. They walked on 4 legs but had multiple arms that ended in blades and tools. Their bodies were covered in dark armor that seemed to be part machine and part living tissue. Where their faces should have been, there were only clusters of red sensors. Mirai checked her scanner. "Frex," she said. "They are raiders from the outer rim. They harvest organic material to fuel their ships. They harvest people?" Junho asked. Mirai did not answer. She did not need to. One of the creatures turned toward them. Its sensors flashed. Then it made a sound like grinding metal and charged. Back to the ship. Deho shouted. They ran. Behind them, more Vrex emerged from the smoke. Their blade arms cut through metal poles and concrete walls like they were paper. The humans barely made it back to the ship before the creatures reached them. Hyegen sealed the door just as a blade smashed against it. "We cannot fight those things," Junho said between gasps for air. "Not with what we have." Deho looked at the screen showing the devastation outside. "We are not here to fight. We are here to help whoever is left. Mirai, can you locate survivors?" She worked at her console for several minutes. "There," she said finally. "Underground shelter. 3 kilometers from here. Life signs showing approximately 2,000 Talani." The ship lifted off and flew low over the burning city. The Vrex did not seem to care about one small vessel. They were too busy with their grim work. When the ship reached the shelter coordinates, they found a heavy metal door built into a hillside. It was surrounded by bodies. The Talani had tried to defend it with farming tools and rocks. It had not been enough, but the door still held. Deho and Junho suited up again and approached the door. Deho knocked using a specific pattern. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. An old Earth signal. After a moment, the door cracked open. Eyes stared out from the darkness. Large brown eyes filled with fear. Then a voice spoke in halting but understandable English. "Who are you?" "We are humans," Deho said. "We came to help." The door opened wider. A Tilani stood there. He was tall and thin, covered in short gray fur. His face was gentle despite the terror in his eyes. He wore simple robes that were now torn and dirty. "I am Ceylon," he said. "I am the elder of this colony, or what remains of it." "How long have you been here?" Cunyo asked. 5 days. "We have no food left. Little water. The children are very frightened." "Come," Deho said. "Our ship is not large, but we can take as many as possible. We will make multiple trips." Ceylon stared at him. "But why?" he asked. "Your kind is not part of the council. You have no obligation to us. Why would you risk your lives?" Deho looked at the elder Tilani for a long moment. "Because no one else will," he said simply. Tears formed in Ceylon's large eyes. He turned back to the shelter and called out in his own language. Slowly, Tilani began to emerge. Most were elderly or children. They moved like people who had given up hope and were now confused to find it again. The crew worked for hours. They carried the sick and the injured. They gave water and food. They made 5 trips to the ship and back. Each time they expected the Vrex to attack. But the creatures seemed focused on the city. They did not notice the small rescue operation. On the final trip, only Ceylon and a handful of younger Tilani remained. The elder refused to leave until everyone else was safe. That is when the Vrex came. 3 of them appeared over the hill. Their sensors locked onto the shelter. They raised their blade arms and charged. Junho pulled out his sidearm and fired. The bullets bounced off the Vrex armor like raindrops. "Get them to the ship," he yelled. Deho grabbed Ceylon and ran. Behind them, Junho kept firing. It was useless, but it bought them seconds. Precious seconds. They made it to the ship just as the first Vrex reached the landing zone. Junho dove through the door. Heejin launched the ship before the door was fully closed. A Vrex blade scraped along the hull, leaving a deep gouge in the metal. But they were away. Inside the ship, 2,000 Tilani crowded into every available space. They sat in the cargo bay, the corridors, even the engine room. They were silent except for the quiet crying of children. Ceylon found Deho on the bridge. The captain was sending a message to Earth. His words were simple and direct. He described what was happening. He described the Vrex. He described the Tilani and their suffering. Then he did something that would change everything. He turned the camera to show Ceylon and his people. "Ceylon," Deho said gently. "Tell them. Tell all of humanity what is happening." The elder Tilani looked into the camera. His voice shook, but his words were clear. "My people are dying," he said. "We sent hundreds of calls for help to the council. They have not answered. We are simple farmers. We have no weapons. We only want to live in peace. But the monsters came and now we are being harvested like crops. Please, if anyone can hear this, please help us. Save our children. We beg you," Ceylon's voice broke. Behind him, Tilani children huddled against their parents. Their large eyes stared at the camera with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Deho ended the transmission and sent it across every human communication channel. To Earth, to the colonies, to every ship and station where humans lived. "What happens now?" Murray asked. "Now," Deho said quietly, "we find out what humanity is really made of." The ship jumped back into faster-than-light travel, carrying its cargo of survivors. Behind them, the rimward colonies continued to burn. And across human space, billions of people were about to see a plea that would echo in their hearts. The message reached Earth at 3:47 in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time. Within minutes, it was on every screen, every device, every channel. People woke to the sound of Ceylon's voice begging for help. They saw the Tilani children with their huge, frightened eyes. They saw the burning cities. By dawn, the world was moving. The governments acted first. Emergency sessions were called. Defense ministers gave orders. Within 6 hours, the Pacific Fleet launched. Within 12 hours, the Atlantic Fleet followed. The European Union, the African Coalition, and the Asian Alliance all sent ships. Even the smaller nations contributed what they could. But it was not just the military that responded. Civilian vessels joined the fleet. Cargo ships, medical ships, even private yachts modified with supply containers. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers. The lines stretched for miles. Young people, old people, Veterans who had retired years ago put their uniforms back on, and then something unexpected happened. In Seoul, a man named Taejin arrived at the military office with his dog. The dog was a German shepherd named Thunder, trained for search and rescue. "I want to help," Taejin said. "We both do." The officer looked confused. "This is a military operation," he said. "We do not need pets." "Thunder is not a pet," Taejin replied. "He has saved 43 people from collapsed buildings. He can find survivors better than any scanner. You will need him." The officer started to refuse. Then he saw the news playing on the screen behind him. The Talani children hiding in the rubble. He looked at Thunder, who sat patiently with intelligent eyes. "Report to Bay 7, the officer said quietly. The same scene repeated across the world. In London, a woman brought her team of rescue dogs. In Sydney, a man brought his trained hawk used for wildlife control. In Nairobi, conservationists arrived with rehabilitated wolves. In Alaska, mushers brought their sled dog teams. They all said the same thing. "You will need us." At first, the military did not understand. These were animals. How could they help in space combat? But the handlers insisted. And the videos of the Talani suffering kept playing. Eventually, someone made the decision. If people wanted to bring their animals, let them come. 2 weeks after the message was sent, the human fleet arrived at the Rimward colonies. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. 300 warships, 500 support vessels, 50,000 soldiers, 10,000 Marines, and among them, 800 animals and their handlers. The Vreks were not prepared. They had expected the council to eventually respond with committee meetings and negotiations. They had expected evacuations at most. They had not expected war. And they definitely had not expected what humanity brought with them. The battle began in orbit. Human warships engaged the Vreks harvester vessels. The Vreks were efficient fighters, but they relied on predictable tactics. They calculated optimal firing solutions. They executed coordinated maneuvers. Everything was mechanical and precise. Human tactics were chaos. Pilots broke formation to protect damaged ships. Captains ignored optimal strategies to save crew members. It made no logical sense. But it worked. Within 3 hours, the Vreks fleet was in retreat. Within 6 hours, human ships controlled the orbit. Then came the ground assault. Marines landed on all 7 planets. They found the Vreks harvesting units still at work, still dragging away Talani survivors. The fighting was brutal and close. The Vreks were stronger and better armored, but they had a weakness. They could not adapt to unpredictability. That is where the animals made the difference. Taejin and Thunder were in the first wave. They landed in a city where hundreds of Talani were trapped beneath collapsed buildings. The Vreks had given up trying to dig them out and were waiting for them to die. Thunder did not wait. The dog moved through the rubble with his nose to the ground. He barked once, twice, then began to dig. The Marines followed his lead and pulled out 5 Talani children. Thunder moved to the next spot. More survivors. Again and again, the dog found people that the scanners had missed. But then the Vreks noticed. 3 harvesting units approached. Their sensors locked onto Thunder. They raised their blade arms. Taejin stepped in front of his dog and fired his rifle. The bullets barely scratched the Vreks' armor. Thunder did something the Vreks had never seen. He did not run. He did not freeze. He attacked. The dog was a blur of fur and teeth. He went low beneath the Vreks' blade arms and clamped his jaws on an exposed joint. The creature made a sound like tearing metal and stumbled. Thunder let go, dodged a blade strike, and attacked again. This time other dogs joined him. A team of Belgian Malinois arrived with their handlers. They worked together, coordinating without words, finding weak points in the Vreks' armor. The Vreks tried to adapt. They swung their blades faster. They changed their stance to protect the joints. But they could not predict what the dogs would do next, because the dogs were not following a program. They were thinking. They were reacting. They were alive in a way the Vreks could not understand. One by one, the Vreks fell. The Marines finished them with concentrated fire while the dogs kept them off balance. Within an hour, the area was secure. Taejin knelt beside Thunder and checked him for injuries. The dog had a few scratches, but his tail was wagging. "Good boy," Taejin whispered. The same story repeated across all 7 planets. In one city, hawks flew reconnaissance and spotted Vreks ambushes before they could be sprung. In another, wolves tracked Vreks units through dense forests where scanners were useless. Horses carried wounded through terrain where vehicles could not go. Even cats proved useful, their ability to move silently making them perfect scouts. But it was not just their skills that mattered. It was what they represented. The Tilani watched in amazement as humans fought alongside creatures that should have been predators. They saw soldiers share their food with dogs. They saw handlers risk their lives to protect their animals. They saw bonds that went beyond logic or survival. One Tilani child approached Tajin after a rescue. She had been trapped for 8 days without food or water. Thunder had found her and refused to leave her side until the Marines dug her out. "Can I touch him?" the child asked in broken English. Tajin looked at Thunder. The dog seemed to understand. He sat down and lowered his head. The Tilani child reached out with a shaking hand and touched the fur between Thunder's ears. The dog's tail wagged gently. "He is soft," the child said in wonder. "Yes," Tajin replied, "and he came a very long way to help you." The battle lasted 3 weeks. The Vrex fought hard, but they could not adapt to the chaos humanity brought. They could not understand soldiers who cared more about saving civilians than winning efficiently. They could not predict animals who acted on instinct and intelligence rather than programming. Eventually, the Vrex made a calculation. The rimward colonies were no longer profitable. Too many resources lost. Too many units destroyed. They withdrew their remaining forces and fled back to the outer rim. The humans did not pursue. They were too busy saving lives. In the weeks that followed, they rebuilt shelters. They distributed food and medicine. They searched every ruin for survivors. The dogs never stopped working. Neither did their handlers. Of the 40 million Tilani who had lived in the rimward colonies, 12 million survived. It was not enough. But it was 12 million more than would have lived if humanity had not answered the call. And across the galaxy, every species that had eyes to see and ears to hear learned something new. They learned that humanity did not keep predators as weapons. They kept them as friends. And that friendship had just saved millions of lives. News of the rimward victory spread across the galaxy in hours. Ships carried stories. Traders shared videos. Refugees told anyone who would listen about the humans and their animal companions who had fought the Vrex when no one else would. The Galactic Council was not pleased. High Arbiter. Velkoth called an emergency session. Captain Deho and his crew were summoned back to Harmony 7. This time there was no welcoming ceremony. Armed guards escorted them to the council chamber. The atmosphere was cold and tense. Velkoth stood at the center platform. His yellow eyes were hard. His voice echoed through the chamber with barely controlled anger. "Captain Deho, you have committed an act of unauthorized military aggression. You mobilized human forces without council approval. You engaged in combat without a mandate. You have violated 17 separate treaties regarding the use of force in council space." Deho stood straight and calm. He did not look apologetic. "With respect, Arbiter, the rimward colonies were under attack. The council chose to form a committee. We chose to save lives. You chose to act like savages," Velkoth shouted. "You brought weapons of war. You brought predators. Those creatures attacked Vrex forces without mercy. This is exactly why humanity cannot be trusted," a voice interrupted from the gallery. It was Selan. The Tilani elder had been allowed to attend as a witness. He stood slowly, leaning on a cane. His gray fur was still dirty from the rescue. His eyes still held the shadow of trauma. But his voice was strong. "May I speak, Arbiter?" Velkoth looked annoyed but nodded. "You may address the council." Selan walked to the center floor. He moved like someone who had aged decades in weeks. When he spoke, every delegate leaned forward to hear. "I am Selan of the Tilani. I speak for 12 million survivors. We sent 417 distress calls to this council. You received everyone. You discussed. You debated. You formed committees. And while you talked, my people died." His voice cracked, but he continued. "The humans came. They did not wait for permission. They did not ask for payment. They simply came. And yes, they brought their animals. Those animals you fear so much? They found my daughter buried under 3 meters of rubble. They found hundreds of children the Vrex had left to die. They worked day and night without rest." Selan turned to face Velkoth directly. "You call them savages. You call them dangerous. But they are the only ones who answered when we begged for mercy. So I ask you, honored Arbiter, what does that make you?" Silence filled the chamber. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. A few looked ashamed. Velkoth's scales seemed to darken. The Talani's suffering is tragic, Velkoth said carefully, but that does not excuse violation of council law. We have procedures for a reason. Without order, there is chaos. Another voice spoke up, this time from one of the council delegates. A being that looked like a floating crystal spoke in a sound like chiming bells. Perhaps our procedures need to change. The humans acted because we failed to act. They saved millions because we were too slow to save any. Other delegates began to murmur agreement. Velkoth raised his hands for silence. Order. The question before us is simple. Should humanity be punished for their actions or rewarded? I call for a vote. All in favor of censure and sanctions against humanity? About half the delegates raised their hands or appendages or whatever they used to signal agreement. All opposed? The other half signaled. The vote was split perfectly down the middle. Velkoth looked frustrated. In the event of a tie, the arbiter casts the deciding vote. He paused, clearly torn. Finally, he spoke. Humanity is hereby censured for unauthorized military action. They are fined 100 million credits and banned from council space for 5 years. Dr. Mireille gasped. Yunyo clenched his fists, but Deho simply nodded. He had expected this. However, Velkoth continued, his voice softer. The council recognizes that human actions, while unauthorized, saved millions of lives. Therefore, the fine will be waived if humanity agrees to maintain a non-military presence in the rimward colonies to assist with reconstruction. It was a compromise. Not perfect, but something. Daiho bowed slightly. We accept. The council session ended. As the delegates filed out, something unexpected happened. Individual species began approaching the human delegation. They did it quietly, away from official cameras. They spoke in low voices. A bird-like species offered to share their medical technology. A crystalline being offered mining rights on 3 of their systems. A herbivore species that looked like giant rabbits offered food supplies. One by one they came. Some thanked the humans. Some apologized for not voting against the censure. All of them wanted to establish private relationships. By the time the humans returned to their ship, they had received 57 offers of alliance. 57 species willing to work with humanity outside the official council framework. What just happened? Yunyo asked. Dr. Mireille smiled for the first time in weeks. We lost the vote but won something better. We gained allies. Over the next year, those alliances grew stronger. Humanity helped rebuild the rimward colonies. They shared technology. They trained local security forces. And yes, they brought dogs and other animals. The Tilani, who had been terrified of predators, learned to work alongside them. Children who had hidden from Thunder now played with him in the streets. Other species watched and learned. Some began to study the animals on their own worlds with new eyes. Maybe companionship was not weakness. Maybe it was strength. The unofficial alliance of species began calling themselves something new. The Free Systems Alliance. They had no central government, no bureaucracy, just a simple agreement. If one member called for help, the others would answer. No committees, no delays, just action. Humanity became the de facto leaders, not because they demanded it, but because everyone else looked to them. Captain Deho became Ambassador Deho. Dr. Mireille became the chief of xenological research for the FSA. Lieutenant Junho trained security forces across dozens of worlds. Pilot Hyejin taught the next generation of pilots from every species. The Galactic Council watched nervously. They had meant to punish humanity. Instead, they had created a rival organization, an organization that actually worked. Back on Earth, Taejin and Thunder became famous. Videos of them rescuing Tilani children played on every screen. Children wanted to grow up to be like Taejin. They wanted dogs like Thunder. Animal shelters around the world were emptied as families rushed to adopt. The bond between humans and animals grew even stronger. Thunder himself seemed to understand he was special. When Taejin took him to schools to talk about the rescue, the dog sat patiently while children petted him. His tail wagged gently. His eyes were kind. He had seen terrible things, but he held no anger. 5 years passed. The ban on humanity entering council space was about to expire. The Free Systems Alliance had grown to 83 member species. They had their own trade routes, their own defense pacts, their own culture of mutual support. The Galactic Council was no longer the only power in the galaxy. And they knew it. Then the Vrex returned. And this time they did not target the weak colonies on the edge of space. This time they struck at the heart of the Council itself. The Vrex fleet appeared without warning. One moment the skies above the Council's core worlds were clear. The next moment they were filled with dark ships that blotted out the sun. There were thousands of them, far more than had attacked the rimward colonies. The Council's defense fleet responded immediately, but they were overwhelmed in minutes. Vrex ships were faster, stronger, and more numerous than anyone had expected. The creatures had spent 5 years building their forces. Now they were taking revenge for their earlier defeat. Harmony 7 was one of the first targets. The great station that held the Council chambers came under heavy fire. Its shields failed within an hour. Evacuation ships launched, but many were destroyed before they could escape. High Arbiter Velkoth stood in the ruined Council chamber. Half the ceiling had collapsed. Fires burned in the galleries. He watched through the shattered windows as Vrex boarding parties attached to the station's hull. "We are finished," one of his advisors said quietly. "The fleet is destroyed. The core worlds are defenseless." Velkoth said nothing for a long moment. Then he did something he had never thought he would do. He reached for the private communication channel, the one that connected directly to the Free Systems Alliance headquarters. Ambassador Deho answered within seconds. His face appeared on the screen. Behind him, Deho could see the organized chaos of the FSA command center. "Arbiter, what can I do for you?" Velkoth felt shame burn in his chest. But he pushed it aside. "Help us," he said simply. "Please." Deho did not hesitate. "We are already on our way. The FSA fleet launched 30 minutes ago, when we detected the Virex incursion. Cars to your position is 6 hours. Velkoth blinked in surprise. "You launched before we called?" "We saw the attack," Deho replied. "We knew you would need help." "Hold on, Arbiter. We are coming." The connection ended. Velkoth stood in silence, processing what had just happened. The humans had not waited for an apology. They had not demanded concessions. They had simply come, just like they had for the Talani. 6 hours felt like 6 years. The Vrex continued their assault. They landed ground forces on 3 Council worlds. Millions died in the first waves. The Council military fought bravely, but they were not prepared for an enemy this ruthless. Then the FSA fleet arrived. They came in a massive wave. Human ships at the front, Talani medical vessels behind them. Support craft from dozens of species spread throughout the formation. The fleet was not as large as the Vrex Armada, but it moved with purpose and coordination that the Council fleet had lacked. The space battle was fierce. Human pilots flew with controlled chaos, protecting each other, sacrificing optimal positions to save damaged ships. The Vrex could not predict their movements. Slowly, the tide began to turn, but the real war was on the ground. Human Marines landed on all 3 invaded worlds, and this time they brought even more animals. Dogs, wolves, hawks, even horses for rapid deployment in areas where vehicles could not go. The handlers had learned from the Rimward campaign. They knew what worked. Tajin and Thunder were in the first dropship. Now older, now a sergeant himself, Tajin commanded a full platoon of handlers and their animals. Thunder had gray in his muzzle, but his eyes were still sharp. He knew what was coming. They landed on a world called Verimast, home to the crystalline beings who had been among the first to ally with humanity. The city was under siege. Vrex harvesting units moved through the streets, dragging away civilians. The crystalline people tried to fight, but their bodies were fragile. Thunder hit the ground running. He did not wait for orders. He had done this before. The dog moved through the chaos like a shadow, his nose tracking survivors, his bark alerting the Marines to hidden Vrex units. Behind him came a pack of younger dogs, all trained by Thunder's example. The Vrex had learned nothing. They still relied on predictability. They still could not adapt to the chaos of living creatures working together. The dogs found their weak points. The hawks spotted their ambushes. The wolves drove them into kill zones where human weapons could finish them. But it was not easy. The Vrex were stronger than before. They had adapted their armor. They fought with desperate fury. Many Marines fell. Many animals were wounded. Thunder himself took a glancing blow from a Vrex blade, leaving a deep gash across his shoulder. Tajin wanted to pull him back, but Thunder refused. The dog limped forward, still tracking, still working. He would not abandon the people who needed him. In one sector, Thunder found a shelter where 50 crystalline civilians were trapped. The Vrex were cutting through the door. Thunder attacked, buying precious seconds. Tajin and his squad arrived just in time. They drove back the Vrex and evacuated the civilians. One of the crystalline beings approached Thunder carefully. The dog was lying down now, panting heavily, his shoulder bleeding. The being made a sound like wind chimes. "Thank you." Thunder's tail wagged weakly. The battle lasted 2 weeks. Slowly, systematically, the FSA forces drove back the Vurex. They retook the cities. They secured the orbits. They rescued millions of civilians from 3 different species. When the Vrex realized they would lose again, they made one final assault. They sent every remaining ship and ground unit at Harmony 7. They wanted to destroy the Council's heart, even if it meant their own annihilation. The FSA met them there. Human ships formed a defensive wall around the station. Every allied species contributed whatever they could. Even civilian vessels armed themselves and joined the fight. The battle was the largest in galactic history. Inside the station, Velkoth watched from the restored Council chamber. He saw human ships take hits meant for Council vessels. He saw Talani medical ships rush to aid wounded Council personnel. He saw species that had been strangers months ago working together with perfect trust. After 3 days of continuous combat, the Vrex fleet broke. The few surviving ships fled back to the outer rim. This time the FSA did pursue. They chased the Vrex all the way to their home worlds and destroyed their ability to ever threaten the galaxy again. When it was over, when the last fires were extinguished and the last civilian rescued, the galaxy took stock. Millions had died. Entire cities lay in ruins. But billions had been saved, and everyone knew who had saved them. The Council called a special session. Every surviving delegate attended. The chamber was packed. Velkoth stood at his platform, but this time he did not look commanding. He looked humbled. "Ambassador Deho," he said quietly. "Please approach." Deho walked to the center floor. He looked tired. Everyone looked tired, but he stood straight and proud. 5 years ago, Velkoth began, I told you that humanity could not join the Council. I said you were too dangerous, too violent, too unpredictable. I was wrong. He paused, and for the first time emotion cracked his voice. You saved us, not because we asked, not because we deserved it, but because it was right. You and your companions, your dogs and wolves and hawks, your impossible bonds with creatures that should be your enemies. That is not weakness. That is strength we never understood. Velkoth stepped down from his platform. He walked to Deho and did something unprecedented. He bowed. The Council wishes to make an offer, he said. Not membership. We understand you have built something better than what we offer, but partnership. Equal partnership. The Council and the Free Systems Alliance working together. What do you say? Deho looked at his crew. Mirai nodded. Yunyo smiled. Heejin gave a thumbs up. He turned back to Velkoth. We accept, Deho said. On one condition, name it. Every species in the galaxy gets to learn about companionship, about building bonds across different kinds of life, about working together instead of alone. That is what saved us. That is what the galaxy needs. Velkoth's yellow eyes softened. Agreed. The chamber erupted in sound. Delegates from 300 species made noises of approval. It was not perfect. There would be challenges ahead. But it was a beginning. Later, after the ceremony, after the speeches and celebrations, Teijin found a quiet corner of the station. Thunder lay beside him, his shoulder bandaged. The dog was old now. This had been his last mission. A Talani child approached shyly. It was the same child Thunder had found in the rubble 5 years ago. She was older now. Braver, may I? She asked. Teijin nodded. She sat down and gently petted Thunder's head. The dog's tail wagged slowly. Thank you, she whispered. You saved my life twice. Thunder licked her hand gently. Teijin smiled. That is what he does. That is what we all do. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. Animals that had once been feared were now celebrated. Species that had never thought about companionship began to explore the possibilities. The Talani adopted their first dogs. The crystalline beings started working with birds. Even some council species began programs to understand the animals on their own worlds. The galaxy was changing, and at the center of that change was a simple truth, a truth that humanity had known for thousands of years, but the galaxy was only now learning. Strength does not come from standing alone. It comes from the bonds we build, the friendships we forge, the love we share across the barriers of species and circumstance. 5 years earlier, a plea for mercy had echoed across human space. The Talani had begged for help when all hope seemed lost. and humanity had answered, not with words or promises, but with action. They had brought their ships and their soldiers. But more importantly, they had brought their companions.